Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's keynote session. I'm very, very happy to introduce our speaker for tonight, Abhishek Gupta. He is the founder and principal researcher at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, an international nonprofit research institute with a mission to democratize AI ethics literacy. He works in machine learning and serves as the CSE responsible AI board member at Microsoft, where his work helps solve the toughest technical challenges of Microsoft's biggest customers. Through his work as the chair of the standards working group at the Green Software Foundation, he is leading the development of the software carbon intensity standard towards the comparable and interoperable measurement of the environmental impacts of AI systems. His work focuses on applied technical and policy measures for building ethical, safe, and inclusive AI systems, specializing on the operationalization of AI ethics and its deployments in organizations and assessing and mitigating the environmental impact of these systems. His work on community building has been recognized by governments from across North America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. And I'm very, very happy that he's here tonight to share some more about his work. The title of his keynote session is going to be Turning the Gears, Organizational and Technical Challenges and the Operationalization of AI Ethics. And I yield the floor to you now, Abhishek.
Thank you so much. And great to be here. For those joining in from Europe, good evening. For those in North America, well, welcome to the afternoon. And from elsewhere in the world, whatever time you're in. Glad to be here and talking about some of the work that I've been doing. And the subject of today's talk is to think about the organizational and technical challenges as we operationalize AI ethics. And it's important in the sense that, we are, there's a lot of set of principles out there, guidelines, things of those nature. And when we really start to think about, well, what, how do we put all these ideas into practice? We run into a few challenges, things that I've learned from my experience working within Microsoft through the work that we do at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute as well. And then hopefully we get a chance to also field questions. Please feel free to drop them in chat or wherever else you're joining in from. And the lovely folks from AI for People will probably bring those up to me, and I'll do my best to answer them. So just to confirm, you're able to see my screen, right?
Yes.
Perfect, fantastic. Okay, so already got a good introduction to who I am, so I won't belabor that too much. I will just, I guess, contextualize everything that I'm going to say by giving a little bit of nuance as to who I am. I'm first and foremost a practitioner. I believe some of the best lessons come from the field, and that's important, especially when we're talking about putting into practice these responsible AI principles. It's great to have a first-hand experience, a view from the weeds when it comes to putting these principles into practice and working with these systems on a daily basis. Secondly, I'm a community builder. I think it's very, very important that we do this work of building responsible AI from the perspective of inclusion, from the perspective of bringing in people who are ultimately going to be affected by these systems. And above everything else, we really can't know everything that is to know in terms of putting these principles into practice. And so we all have our blind spots, and really working with our communities, we can help to avoid some of those blind spots by learning from their experiences and what matters to them as we're putting these systems into practice. And finally, I'm a pragmatist. I believe that change needs to happen but meaningful change also requires compromise, and that compromise can take many forms in the form of trade-offs between what it means to bring business value in terms of these AI systems, but also understanding what the needs of the community are, so that you're building something that actually is useful and is in alignment with the values that the community, the audience, the stakeholders have for whom you are building these systems. So with that said, I think this is very important. As we talk about what the future of AI holds, the future of AI, the future of responsible AI, is what we make of it. And there is a lot of agency in our hands as practitioners, as community stakeholders, to do something where we can guide this future towards something that yields or that results in something that is in alignment with the values of the community, something that actually brings value to the people for whom we're building these systems. So a little bit more about the Montreal AI Ethics Institute. As was mentioned in the introduction, our mission is to democratize AI ethics literacy. We do that through a few avenues. We do that through community, through education, and through research. On the community front, we've got a lot of learning initiatives, things like public workshops, things like a learning community that we hosted over the period of 3 months earlier this year, where we interacted with, or rather we brought together folks from all walks of life, spanning civil society, academia, industry, government, to come together and do a deep dive on various areas within AI ethics, things like disinformation, differential privacy, etc. Result of which was a report that we published, which you can find on our website, that dives into the findings of those discussions and subsequent research that was carried out by the participants of that. The public workshops that we host and participate in are, again, free and accessible to all. They typically touch on various topics spanning areas, again, like privacy, but also talking about bias, talking about organizational ethics, value alignment. We've got a session coming up on value sensitive design in December. And these sessions are, again, an opportunity for you to interact with others in this responsible AI community, learn from them, find opportunities to work with them, but at the same time, also get an opportunity to interact with us, our staff, and know a bit more about what our thinking is on some of these areas within AI ethics. Finally, we also, on the community front, do consultations for governments and multilateral organizations. So we worked with, for example, the National Security Commission on AI, Prime Minister's Office of New Zealand, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and many other government organizations, offering them advice on the work that they're doing, so that the responsible AI principles, guidelines, regulations, laws are more effective in terms of achieving their goal. The second pillar of our work is education. So we publish a weekly newsletter called the AI Ethics Brief, which digests the latest research and reporting in this space to make it accessible to everybody. We also have domain-specific columns, things like things that cover the intersection of AI and sociology. We've got something on AI governance and other columns that I invite you to go and check out. And finally, we've got our quarterly State of AI Ethics report, which digests and processes everything that's happened in the past quarter in the space of AI ethics, making it accessible again to everybody. And finally, on the research front, and perhaps of greatest importance to what we're going to talk about today, a lot of my work personally focuses on the environmental impacts of AI. Our staff has also worked on how to effectively teach AI ethics, so AI ethics pedagogy. It's something that's very important as more and more courses are including AI ethics as an essential component, making the business case for responsible AI. In fact, if you had participated in the workshop that two of our staff members hosted a couple of hours ago, you'd have met Massa there, who's been working on exploring this pillar in terms of the business case for responsible AI. ML ops for responsible AI is something that's very close to the work that I'm doing in terms of thinking about responsible AI from an AI lifecycle perspective. And finally, quantifying the state of responsible AI, which is a research partnership with some external collaborators that we have at the Institute. So as I said, the State of AI Ethics is a quarterly report. The link for that is on your screens now if you would like to take a look. I'd encourage you to go and grab a copy of the latest version that's published out there. If you wait a couple of weeks, we've got our final edition for this year coming out as well. And here's the link for the AI ethics brief that I mentioned. It's read by about 6,000 people who are policymakers, technical leaders from different kinds of organizations from around the world. So another thing for you to check out. Well, without any delay, I guess getting into what the core of today's talk is going to be about, which is, well, how do we think about AI, or rather responsible AI, and how do we put that into practice very concretely within organizations, and well, what challenges we run into, and how can we go about overcoming those challenges. I really like this quote from Arthur C. Clarke because I think it adequately captures what AI is, though in a sort of very philosophical sense, I would say, because AI is a constantly moving target. There isn't a particular piece of technology that you can say, constitutes AI. In fact, what used to be thought of as AI 20 years ago is faded so much into the background that we don't even think of it as AI anymore, and that goalpost keeps shifting. So let's first start by contextualizing AI in the context of an organization, and specifically try and answer, well, what does AI change for the organization compared to previous technological changes? There's nothing new in terms of technology disrupting and reorganizing how businesses, corporations, organizations function. But this time around with AI, there is something that's different. And what's different is the scale of impact and the pace of impact. So when we're talking about the scale of impact that AI has, first and foremost, it really has the ability to affect functions across many different business units, and changing things in different parts of that value chain within the organization. And this is important because when we're looking at any disruptive technology, understanding how it reshapes or reorients interactions, processes, and the implications that it has in terms of how people work within an organization is critical to basically mapping how responsible AI actually moves from principles to practice. In addition, it also impacts the core competencies of the organizations, especially when we're thinking about the labor impacts of AI. There are a lot of things that we previously thought were sort of untouchable in terms of the capabilities of humans, but that's something that has changed quite significantly with the introduction of AI, with it sort of invading or pervading many different parts of the organization. And then finally, it also has an impact on the competitiveness of the firm. So that competitiveness, the business edge that any organization has, can quickly diminish against those organizations that sort of adopt an AI first mindset, perhaps, or are structured to harness this better. In terms of the pace of impact, again, technologies have always come and gone. But what's different with how AI is being deployed today is that you can go from lab to live in months. And what I mean by that is that we have faster pathways to get research from academic labs to products, especially when we're thinking about how industrial labs or research labs that are housed within industry are a fast track to experimenting with technology, with these solutions, and then getting them out into products and services within the span of a few months. Also, capabilities are supercharged within the organization, so you can get these sort of flywheels that can accelerate if the right feedback loops are created. So it probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody listening that when you have the right feedback loops that are set up for gathering data and feeding that back into creating better products and services, it drives more people to consume those products and services as they are better, and hence offering up more data and spinning that flywheel faster and faster. And finally, the speed at which we perform all these functions within the organization grows as we replace some of the lower tier cognitive functions of the organization with AI systems. It also introduces new opportunities by mining for these patterns where you have repetitive behavior that is amenable to automation. So it's all fun and games when we talk about all of these things in the abstract, but I enjoy interacting with the folks who are listening in as well. And I see that there are, I think, a couple of questions that are already filtering in. I'd love to take the opportunity now for those who are listening to quickly, this should come up on your screen in a second, to visit menti.com and punch in the code that's on your screen, and we'll be able to see how fellow participants, fellow listeners are also thinking about responsible AI. And of course, I'll cover what I think are some things that are essential for operationalizing responsible AI. But if you're tuning in, it would be great if you can navigate to menti.com, punch in that code, and type in what are 3 things that you believe are essential for operationalizing responsible AI. And I'll give it a few seconds for those who are still in that process, hopefully. And what we'll see on the screen is a word cloud pop-up that'll showcase some of the areas that folks are thinking about in terms of the things that are essential for operationalizing responsible AI. Just want to make sure that for the organizers that you're able to see my screen that has the question on there, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So
a person, you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think people are punching things in, so that's That's great.
A person on the audience asked if you can reshare the link about the AI ethics handbook and the 2 links that you shared before, because they they don't write it down.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can drop that in the chat.
Okay, perfect.
Chime in. Okay, yeah, I appreciate people chiming in here. So we already see a few things in terms of governance, knowledge, governance gaining prominence here as more people are chiming in. Fairness and regulations is definitely. Empathy, I really like whoever put in empathy. I really appreciate that. I would love for you to ask me a question or bring that up as we near the end of the presentation. I'd love to hear more about that as well. Yeah, I see governance being front and center, and it's a really important thing that I'll touch on as well. Reducing bias and accessibility, yeah, definitely. Education, yeah, I think so. Education, both internal to the organization and external. In fact, I would say education and communication about what's being done in AI ethics is important. Knowledge, democratization, yes. And I feel democratization also brings up an interesting point. And if someone wants to ask me a question on that later, I have thoughts in terms of, I think, where the ecosystem is heading towards today, and how that's actually counter to the ability for us to democratize AI, and how people can build AI systems, but also, and perhaps more importantly, how people can build responsible AI systems is also undemocratic a little bit today, because of the kind of knowledge that's required, the kind of access to resources that are required, etc. So that's a great point. Um, thank you to others who are chiming in. I think there are a lot more points that are jumping up on the screen here. Environmental conciseness, absolutely. Multiplicities, yeah, I'd love to hear more from whoever chimed in on that. I think that's a great point. Flexibility in terms of addressing um, or making the system adaptive as things change, I think is another important aspect. So this is great. I'll let uh, folks continue to chime in there, and I'll jump back to my presentation. But these are all great points, and I think the fact that we are already able to identify some of these key areas which we think are important in terms of education, governance, fairness, and inclusivity, as you see, being the most important areas that that you guys believe should be addressed is fantastic. So thank you to those who chimed in, and to those who are continuing to chime in. The link is live, so you can also continue to see what others are thinking about this. And so I'll jump back to my presentation, and hopefully the screen is visible again. So let me then jump into some of the organizational lessons then. How do we meaningfully deploy responsible AI within the organization? And I think, when I'm talking about turning these gears, think about an organization as a set of gears where, one process or one interaction leads to something else and has cascading effects. I think if we were to meaningfully do this, we need to focus on three core areas, which are people, processes, and tools. And the reason I emphasize this is that without even one of them, at some point, your efforts are going to sputter and fail. And you end up in a state where there will be a lot of frustration, and you don't want that. So if you address all three of these areas, and as I sort of walk through them, the probability of success for operationalizing responsible AI within your organization will be pretty high. So first and foremost, people, when we're building responsible AI, it's the reason we're doing any and all of this work is about people. The photo that you see on here is one of the sessions that we hosted a couple of years ago at the Microsoft offices in Montreal, and you'll see that when we're talking about, well, how do you put these ideas into practice, it always takes me back to that session where people had a lot of great ideas in terms of what it took to take these ideas and put them into practice. And I mean, Microsoft generously provided us the space for that session. We had folks come in from a variety of organizations, from universities, from civil society organizations, from other corporations, from government. And the things that stood out were threefold. So there was leadership, culture, and empowerment. So when we're talking about involving your people, first and foremost, having a clear top-level executive who can drive the agenda and take responsibility for this work in AI ethics is extremely important. Why? Because you need to have buy-in from leadership. You need to have a resource allocation from leadership, and you need to have someone who sets a clear direction for the rest of the employees in the organization if we're to meaningfully operationalize responsible AI. And a clear top-level executive helps to do that. So that can take the form of a chief AI ethics officer or some other role that fits within the organizational hierarchy. And in fact, we have an article up on our website that actually dives deeper into this area as well, that I encourage you to take a look at. Second is that when we have leadership that is involved, it demonstrates to the rest of the organization the importance of responsible AI to that organization, in the sense that it is something that that the organization as a whole cares about and is willing to put resources behind in achieving it. And finally, from a leadership perspective, it also helps that you have access to other top-level executives who can drive change, be that your chief people officer, your chief executive officer, of course, who leads the organization in terms of operations, in terms of information, data. All of those things become a lot easier if you have someone who takes that charge at a leadership level. From a cultural perspective, none of these things happen overnight, of course, but the more integrated they are to the natural day-to-day work that employees do within the organization, part of which comes through culture, the more the likelihood that this endeavor to operationalize AI ethics becomes successful. And finally, if you're able to demonstrate an alignment with existing company values, company mission, company vision, then it again, sort of, as we're talking about culture, it makes it a little easier to make this operationalization of responsible AI a reality. And then finally, when we're talking about empowerment, it's great that you have fantastic leadership that cares about this, a great culture that makes it more natural to think about responsible AI in your day-to-day activities. But people, the employees, need to be empowered to take action. How do they do that? You need to allow your rank and file employees, you need to give them enough space, enough air cover, enough opportunities to raise concerns, but also the ability to act on those concerns as they bring them up. And a concrete example for that could be, and a very easy example to get started with, is hosting town halls to gather inputs, and then demonstrating that you take that advice to heart and putting that into practice. More importantly, perhaps, when we're talking about empowerment, giving employees the ability to work across interdisciplinary boundaries within the organization. So often, when business units are separated or functional areas are separated within an organization, it becomes really hard to collaborate and work with others. And so breaking those silos down, for example, allowing design, marketing, business, technical teams, legal teams to work together to put responsible AI into practice across that product or service lifecycle is really important. And so having that empowerment, giving your employees the tools, the processes to do that is extremely important. So when we talk about leadership, it's, this is very famous quote from Donna McGannon. It says that leadership is action, not a position. Yes, it's great to have leadership at the top level that allows for or that sets a clear direction for the rest of the organization. But also, again, when we're talking about empowerment, if you're able to empower your everyday employees, your rank and file employees to take these actions in their everyday work, makes it a little easier to realize responsibility at all levels within the organization. So really, through empowerment, enabling leadership to take place at all levels. Well, when we're talking about people, there also need to be associated processes that help them enact change. Of course, there are already lots of processes that exist within an organization, but supplementing those with clear documentation as an example to operationalize responsibility is important. To give you an example, you can perhaps create a responsible AI standard that lays out not only guidance and values and principles, but also specific pieces of advice in terms of what people or employees can do, be those designers, be those developers, be those marketing people, anybody who's involved in building or selling an AI product service, what can they do to operationalize this advice. So, an example, having an RAI standard, having an internal wiki, anything that you use to manage documentation within your organization, having clear documentation about responsible AI is a useful process to have. Having accessible resources, again, within the organization, be those in the form of internal tooling or utilizing open source tools. There are lots of great ones out there, but also creating human resources that are accessible within your organization. So people who over time, either through their own work or through formal training, build up expertise in responsible AI, making them more widely known within your organization and accessible to others who might be struggling with operationalizing responsible AI, connecting them to these people and helping them sort of address those challenges and move forward is another important process that you can put in place if you want to successfully operationalize responsible AI. And finally, and maybe this, at least in my opinion, is very important, is the ability to share failures openly and to emphasize failures in the sense that having at least in agile development teams, you have this notion of retrospectives, thinking about retrospectives where things have gone wrong with an AI product or service that you deployed, and sharing the results of those openly with the rest of the organization. The reason this is important is that, one, it promotes people to be open about trying out different things and not being afraid that some of them might fail, because failure is accepted and encouraged, in fact, because that it showcases that you at least made an effort and you tried to do something. It's kind of like you can't fail if you don't even try. You don't want to fall into that trap when you're thinking about responsible AI, in the sense that you need to constantly be on the lookout for new tools, new techniques, new research that comes out, and putting that into practice and seeing what works and what doesn't, and then sharing the results of those both within the organization and, if your organization permits, outside of it as well, so that everybody can learn and grow from that experience. Now, governance was something that a lot of you pointed out is important, and I couldn't agree more. Having accountability and protocols in place for example, reporting places where violations have occurred, and how do you know violations have occurred? Having some sort of monitoring, alerting, which I'll talk about, and tools, but also violations that you can assess against a responsible AI standard or something else that you have in place in terms of documentation for your employees. That is very important if you are to, again, operationalize this successfully. And you can have some use cases that are perhaps sensitive, or perhaps those that are ones that require a greater degree of scrutiny. Having monitoring and consulting with internal experts on whether to proceed or not in doing that, again, falls within that governance mechanism and is an important channel, an important avenue to operationalizing responsible AI. Having multiple layers there in terms of that decision-making process also can serve as a safeguarding mechanism, so that you don't hastily release something with that hasn't been sort of tested, approved, and checked for checked against your responsible AI standard or your documentation. Participatory design is a fantastic way to cover our blind spots. For example, in fact, there is this notion of citizen juries, which Microsoft uses, where they bring in these stakeholders for these products and services early into the AI lifecycle and involve them throughout the lifecycle to get a better understanding for whether the product or service that you're building actually is something that follows what is expected in terms of responsible AI. And finally, it's great when you have new processes that you're introducing But it's also important that they align with existing processes. If you try to do too much all at once, it can be quite disruptive to the workings of an organization, and it also creates a lot of friction in terms of adoption. So making sure that any new processes that you're introducing align with existing processes, also making sure that the incentives to practice responsible AI are sort of done, and they're created and checked against the other internal processes, so that you ensure that they operate in tandem with each other rather than at loggerheads. And the reason I say this is sometimes when you have things like employee evaluations or other things where metrics are set that don't really align with these new processes that you've introduced for responsible AI, they can lead people down to having to choose one over the other. And that can at times produce even worse results than having not implemented any process at all. And so sometimes, these habits can be hard to break, and so being cognizant of that is very important. But one thing again that I'll emphasize here is that none of these things are set in stone. A lot of this comes from iterating and testing in the field, and in the field as in actually putting these ideas into practice within your organization. And that's essential to being able to turn these gears effectively. If you just sit and ideate and theorize about how these processes may work or may not work, that's never going to yield the results that you want. In fact, you can learn a lot more by just getting off the ground and trying something in the field rather than just waiting around. So that's just something to keep in mind as you think about operationalizing responsible AI. So I think Ray Bradbury sort of captures it quite well when he says, well, you sort of got to just go to the edge of the cliff and jump off, in the sense that as I said, if you wait around too long thinking and theorizing, you'll never actually learn the lessons that you need to in terms of what works for your organization and what doesn't. Some processes and structures work well within one context, but not in the other. And those lessons can be imparted in a generalized fashion. Those are things that you will learn as you put these ideas into practice, without which there really is no easy way to arrive at those. And if we're speaking about practice, there's nothing that's more important, especially to people who are practitioners, than their tools. And this is important in the sense that when we're talking about operationalizing responsible AI, there are tools for mitigating bias. There are tools that you can put in place for applying differential privacy as an idea. Notions like federated learning. All of these things that you want to do come with open source libraries, tools that you might choose to use. One thing to keep in mind as you're bringing in some of these is that you integrate into existing workflows. So from experience working with various tools that are out there, if the tools don't align with how data scientists are going about doing their routine everyday work, as project deadlines loom, as you get close to your shipping date, a lot of the newer pieces of tools or techniques that you try to introduce fall by the wayside. And that's important to acknowledge, because people will revert to whatever is familiar and practiced and tried and tested. So if you're trying to introduce a new tool, trying to integrate that into existing workflows will allow you to minimize that friction and allow it to become a more natural part of someone's workflow, so that towards the when such deadlines loom, or when things are or when employees are under pressure, they can actually still actually continue to use this because it feels so natural and a part of how they would usually work and operate. You should also be cognizant as you're bringing in new tools and techniques of the audience for whom those tools and techniques are meant. And what I mean by that is that responsible AI is not just something for data scientists or for machine learning engineers. It's also things that can be used by designers, by business executives, and other stakeholders. And so thinking about tooling, not just for these practitioners where it's quite concrete and direct, but also for others, other stakeholders is important in tying all of those together in the sense that you can have things like the clear documentation, the responsible AI standard that I spoke about, or you can have things like model cards for model reporting, which are partially technical, yes, but also accessible to others who want to understand what the implications of deploying an AI system are going to be. And finally, since perhaps if your organization is quite mature in its AI process and has been thinking about responsible AI for a while, you might not need the last point in terms of evangelism. But if you're trying to introduce new tools, new processes, evangelism still helps within the organization in the sense that you still need to communicate how you're going about doing this process and gaining a better understanding for how others might use it or where they find it aligns or it doesn't align with their processes. And for example, hosting brown bags, coffee chats to popularize some of these ideas within the organization will help to percolate this throughout the organization so that you get more adoption and more people actually start using this. We've seen this successfully play out with work in inclusivity efforts and working hard towards doing so with responsible AI as well, in addition to the other vectors that I mentioned, will really help to get this to all parts of your organization. I really like this quote in the sense that it's something that it's like a maxim that I operate with. Not a quote, I guess, attributed to anybody in particular, though if you know who it is, it does belong to, do let me know. But make doing the right thing stupid easy. And what I mean by that is if there is a lot of friction to doing the right thing, other priorities, other pressures start to kick in and people have to think. If you can reduce that cognitive effort, if you can make doing the right thing very, very easy, you boost up the chance that someone will actually take all these great ideas that we have in the responsible AI space and use them in their everyday practice. So it's just a thing to keep in the back of your mind, whether you're thinking about how you structure the organization from a people perspective, what processes you put in place, or what tooling you choose to adopt. Make doing the right thing stupid easy. And finally, I think when we're thinking about these three pillars of people, processes, and tools, one of the things that's important is to give and gather feedback. None of these things, as I said, are perfect, or set in stone, or comprehensive in any way. Though if you do follow all three pillars, you have a very, very high chance of being successful in operationalizing responsible AI. But this also comes with the acknowledgement that you need a lot of iteration and refinement before you get to that place. So when we're thinking about giving and gathering feedback on the people front, it's important to have discussions with your managers if you're an employee, or if you're a manager, having those discussions with your employees in terms of what is useful in terms of the processes that have been introduced and the tools that have been introduced, and doing that, for example, through their quarterly reviews or whatever the review frequency is within your organization. Bringing that up as an explicit agenda point helps. It also helps to sort of surface it if it has faded away over time within the work that's being done at the organization. Peer reviews, so speaking with others on your team or in sister teams within the organization to get an understanding for how they've been using some of these processes and tools, or soliciting feedback in terms of how you've been applying it and whether it is as effective as it could be. And finally, having this degree of openness in terms of communication, in terms of sharing failures, having town halls as an example, where you pose some of these very difficult questions that arise sometimes when you're trying to prioritize one aspect of a product or service over the other, and it entails having to make difficult choices in terms of aligning with the values perhaps that organization has, which may or may not align with the values that the stakeholders hold. So getting clarity from leadership as an example, and encouraging leadership to be open can also increase the effectiveness of all these processes, tools that I mentioned. When we're thinking about processes, work on checking whether the processes that are in place at the moment are bringing operational value. And the operational value specifically in terms of actually putting responsible AI principles into practice. Tracking this operational value will help in the adoption of the processes, because you gather empirical evidence that you can show to those who are hesitant that, hey, this actually does deliver value, and this is how you can use it, and this is the value that it brings you and makes you more effective. And tracking these changes as well showcase the evolution of the process, right? So, when we were talking about before, soliciting feedback, if you can demonstrate, hey, I took your feedback to heart, and here's how I put it to use, and here was the result, that also encourages people to be more open. And finally, having follow-ups when you provide advice to someone on a particular process, making sure that either through a formal committee process or through informal peer reviews, you actually follow up and check that the advice was either applied, or if it wasn't applied, what the reasons were, to make sure that again that we're actually operationalizing these principles into practice. And finally, when we're thinking about tools, having some sort of internal public tracking, and what I mean by that is if you use some sort of a version control system or a project management system, for example, GitHub boards, project boards, tracking how the tools are doing, whether there have been issues raised against the tool if it's not working well, what the resolution for those are, can act as a knowledge building mechanism as well, which is something that a lot of you pointed out as being important to operationalize responsible AI. And it also gives you ample material to iterate and improve upon the tooling. So this whole notion of dog fooding your products and services, you can apply that to internal tools for responsible AI as well. As I've mentioned time and again, testing and iterating in the field is important. So live is always going to be better than lab. Live meaning that you actually take some of these tools, processes, apply them to particular product and services, product or service within your organization, and getting the results from that is always going to give you more than just theorizing about it in a sandbox or in a lab environment. And given that there might be, if you're a large organization, there might be many different use cases for how an AI system is being applied or used, gathering feedback from a diversity of perspectives and practitioners will also be important. It'll help you cover a lot of blind spots that might emerge if you focus on just a small set of use cases. So as I said before, the future of AI and hopefully the future of responsible AI is also what we make of it. So I really encourage you to take some of these messages to heart and apply them to your work within your organization, and most importantly, share what works and what doesn't, because I think we're all learning in this space right now. It's a nascent space. We don't have all the answers, but what we do have is we have each other. There's a lot to learn from each other in terms of how we can successfully operationalize AI ethics. And as I mentioned, the AI ethics brief is a great way to engage with us as well. We publish this on a weekly basis. If you have something that you're thinking about that you would like for us to feature in that newsletter as well, you can visit that link that's on your screen and reach out to us through that. Of course, if you would like to get in touch with me, I am fairly active on Twitter. You can find me there. My email address is on there as well. I really appreciate this opportunity. It was fantastic speaking with you folks today. And I really appreciate you chiming in and participating in that poll as well. The word cloud was interesting to say the least. And I'm happy to take questions. I see there are already a few in the chat. And so I can see if I can try and answer some of those. Maybe if someone wants to read them out. Yeah.
I was about to say, I can also read them out. That's maybe a bit easier. Thank you so much. It's such an important, but still super difficult topic, of course. And it's only going to get much more important in the future. I mean, we've already seen in the past years how the organizations and how our environment has changed rapidly, and it will just continue to do so. So I think thank you so much for these very, very valuable points, and I'm sure every one of our listeners can take away quite a lot of points to their own work. So I'm going to jump in directly to the questions because there were quite some. Well, but there was also some overlap, so that's quite nice that there are similar questions. The first one would be the companies that ask you for your consult do so because they need to be compliant with the law, or simply because they want to develop AI more ethically?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess I can't speak to anybody's state of mind or their intentions, but it seems that at the outset or on face value, a lot of them do say that they want to develop AI ethically and hence come and want to work with us. But sometimes it's also just to try and be compliant with some laws, and it's reminiscent of what happened with the rollout of GDPR in 2018, right, where it was unfortunately or unfortunately also an opportunity for organizations to signal to their consumers and say, hey, we care about privacy. But it's difficult to disentangle that from whether they really value the privacy of their consumers, or it's just them trying to now get in line because GDPR mandates that they do so. So it's difficult to say. I would hope that it's the latter, where they do want to develop AI ethically. But even if they're just trying to be compliant with the law, I think it's a win for consumers nonetheless.
Definitely, yeah, we should be happy with that as well. If there's some movement. And where would you see the greatest challenges in implementing AI ethics or responsible AI guidelines within businesses or in general corporate organizations?
So I would say I think the biggest challenges arise when the let's say often the mission for various organizations is one that is towards the benefit of people. It's really when it comes down to profit centers and how the financials or what the financial incentives within the organization are. Those are the ones that end up being at loggerheads with implementing AI ethics successfully. For example, if your product or service is geared towards soliciting a higher number of views or clicks, and you can only do so, or you can, let me rephrase, you can only effectively do so by showcasing polarizing content, that's when it becomes difficult, because the financial incentives for you, your business model is such that you want to showcase that kind of content because it generates the most engagement, but it runs counter to what the AI ethics guidelines specify. And those are the places where the greatest challenges arise, when there is friction, when there is opposition. And my advice always there is to look back to the mission of the organization, which, as I said, often is something that is towards the benefit of people, and really taking a hard look and saying, hey, are we willing to sacrifice short-term business benefit in the interest of long-run consumer welfare? And if you're true to your mission, as people say that they are, the organizations say they are, then they would find the correct trade-off.
Yeah, sometimes it has to hurt in the beginning to be better in the end. Yeah. And I think one last question I can maybe combine a little bit. When we look at the compliance, do you think that empowering and educating people would be the most effective way? Or do politics and legislator maybe have a more important role in pushing that principle and like compliance to these principles from the top, so to say?
Yeah, so compliance is interesting in the sense that it's the bare minimum, in my opinion, because regulations set a bar that applies broadly and serves as the lowest common denominator for as many organizations as possible. Most should be doing more than what's just specified in the regulation. So I think from that perspective, education and empowerment, not just of the people within the organization, but also of the legislators and policymakers, is important in the sense that it achieves two goals. One, it helps legislators, policymakers create the right set of regulations and policies and what I mean by that is you also don't want to over or under regulate something or regulate the wrong thing because you have a not adequate enough understanding of technology and how its harms manifest. On the other side of things, for people, it also showcases to them or makes them aware of where things can go wrong and how regulations and policies are actually just the floor, the minimum that they need to do, and how they can do better. Because in my opinion, again, winning long-term business and being successful is going to hinge on consumer trust. And you can build consumer trust by doing right by them. And that might sound very cliche or cheesy, but if you look at some of the organizations that have survived and have been successful over the long run, they have tended to put consumer welfare at the front. And other organizations, unfortunately, fall by the wayside when people realize that, hey, things are going wrong, and we don't want to be, we don't want to support those businesses anymore. And consumers are only becoming savvier now, so it behooves any organization to pay attention to that.
Yeah, that's a really, really great point. Maybe that kind of ties in with the very last question. I'm still going to shoot for you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Then in terms of business controls, it seems still to be rather difficult to audit ethical or responsible AI because there are so many rather untangible aspects. Because like bias, of course, it's sadly most biases are also there because it stays unnoticed. But what would be the most important aspects to focus on in that term? So maybe if I understand the question correctly, also in regards to compliance and controls, how could we move towards a better or more responsible AI?
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about how do we, do an effective audit, a lot of that, the efficacy of that depends on how transparent and how open that product or service is in terms of how it actually works. So, if you think about social media platforms and how news feeds are structured, we actually don't have transparency in terms of what the underlying algorithm is. We can make guesses, we can simulate, but that's at best a modeling of what the actual process is. So if you're trying to audit or evaluate where harms can manifest, you have a poor sort of a poor, image of what the real thing is. So any solutions or any audit results that you surface from that are going to be limited in terms of their real applicability and their real ability to change. Counter that with something that's an internal audit. So people who are actually inside the organization, they can be very effective because they actually do have access to the entire system. They can choose to conduct the audits in a black box or white box fashion, yielding sort of different results. But those audits are going to be much more effective. And if we're talking about, well, any of these business controls, or what are the areas to focus on, the most insightful answers to those questions are going to emerge from internal audits and the willingness of those organizations to share those internal audits more publicly, which I should also add on and say that the ecosystem should also be welcoming of those results in the sense of working effectively with the people who share those results, so that we can arrive at a place where we can act on the insights that are surfaced from it, rather than either just shooting down the effort as being ethics washing, or saying that that the results are false, which all of those things can be true, but we also have to rely a little bit on good faith, because their external audits are only as effective as what the organization is willing to reveal, especially in today's ecosystem where these audits are not mandatory or required by law. It really is on the goodwill of that organization to share as much as they do want to. So.
Well, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you any longer. It was such a great keynote. I'm really happy I got to share that with you. And also thank you from the audience for all your nice questions. If you have to run, that's fine, because I need to share the program for tomorrow. But again, thank you so much. It was very, very insightful, and such an important topic, which will definitely become even more important in the future. And we will see a lot of your work, I'm sure, in the future. That's gonna get up there even more.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to you guys and the audience for listening in today as well.
Perfect. Then I'm going to share my screen now to, no. Oh. So now I can do that. So you should now be able to see the program. Is that correct, Gabri?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'm just going to walk you through the program of tomorrow, because this keynote was the last event for tonight, besides the socializing in GatherTown, which you probably have all taken care of by now. And we have the nice bar, where you can also just talk in private with other people you might have met during the conference, or you just want to get to know a little bit better. Tomorrow we're going to start at 2, also again with a little socializing session, and at 3 the first actual session will be held. That's going to be another getting to know AI for people session, where we will present our organization again, and you get to know us a little bit better and see what we do besides organizing this conference. Afterwards, an exercise in collective intelligence will be held, where we go a little bit deeper into what we've learned and how we can just move forward from there. Then we have a break from 6 to 7. And then we have the last keynote of the conference by Maria de Arteaga. And after that, we have the closing note. So I hope to see you all there. And have a good evening for now. Maybe see you in GatherTown and socializing. And I will stop the live session now as well.